Tara had heard many safety warnings about being alone and always tried to lock her doors carefully before bed, but that wasn't enough. She woke up in the middle of the night, reached for a glass of water on the bedside table, and started drinking when she suddenly froze in fear, looking toward her bedroom door. A dark figure stood in the doorway. She fumbled for the light switch, trying to find something to protect herself with, but everything happened too fast. The intruder acted ruthlessly. Tara was murdered at a moment she never expected. Her body gradually grew cold, and the killer stood there watching her for a long time before leaving. The terror that haunted her mother for life came the next morning when she visited Tara's home to bring her some homemade food. But Tara would never get to eat it. A neighbor's call to the New Orleans police, with the sound of her mother's heart-wrenching sobs in the background, reported that Tara, a young woman living alone in a small apartment near the city outskirts, had been brutally murdered in her own home. The police rushed to the scene after instructing witnesses and family to leave the crime scene untouched and prevent anyone else from approaching the house until law enforcement arrived. The flashing blue and red lights sped through the streets, and the presence of the victim's loved ones could potentially disturb the crime scene due to their uncontrollable emotions. Upon arrival, the police's first task was to remove the victim's family and witnesses from the home. Tara's mother had passed out from the shock, and paramedics worked to stabilize her breathing. A horrific death, she was stabbed multiple times. The victim's eyes remained open, her face still showing shock and terror. The killer was merciless. Some evidence at the scene had been disturbed when the victim's mother lifted her daughter and held her, altering a few things, but other clues would require a careful and thorough investigation. The victim was identified as Tara Johnson, a 24-year-old beautiful woman who worked at a toy store in the city. Friendly and well-liked, she had no known enemies that would seek revenge. There were signs of forced entry on the door lock. The intruder had broken in using a small tool, clearly skilled in the act. Scratches on the lock indicated that a thin, sturdy metal piece and a strong adhesive were used to disable the lock mechanism. Based on the condition of the scene, it was evident that the intruder did this silently, unnoticed by Tara or her neighbors. The intruder had clearly been preparing for this, watching the house for some time, as is typical with this kind of criminal. The living room had been searched. While the intruder had tried not to leave too many traces, careful observation revealed otherwise. The drawers in the living room had been opened, but were not shut fully to avoid making noise. A gap showed that the contents inside had been rummaged through. The intruder appeared to be searching for something, possibly valuables, but there was a chance they were after something more than just money. In the kitchen, there were signs of disturbance too. On the dining table, an unfinished glass of water and a water bottle stood. Water droplets had collected and dried beneath the bottle. Someone had taken water from the fridge, perhaps Tara, or maybe the intruder. The police collected evidence to analyze the DNA left on the rim of the glass. Tara's body was found on the bed, her face still frozen in terror. Blood had soaked through the mattress and thin blanket. There were no signs of sexual assault. The bedside lamp remained on, and the curtains were drawn shut. Unlike the living room, the bedroom showed complete disarray, suggesting the intruder had ransacked it after murdering Tara. Closet doors were flung open, clothes and personal items strewn across the floor. Her purse and bag were empty, and cash and valuables were gone. The police didn't find any fingerprints at the scene other than Tara's, her mother's, and the neighbors. The killer had stabbed Tara in the abdomen multiple times from the front. 6 stab wounds in total, strong and decisive. Her liver, kidneys, and spleen were ruptured, and the cause of death was determined to be blood loss. The placement of the wounds indicated that the killer was right-handed and had a brutal determination to ensure Tara's death. There were no signs of a struggle or fight at the scene, meaning Tara was caught completely off guard with no chance to defend herself. The neighbor, still in shock, gave their statement at the scene. "I was in the garden when I heard the screams and cries of a woman coming from the house. I rushed over, the door was already open, and the living room was empty. So I headed toward the bedroom and saw the same scene the police saw later. Her mother was holding her, crying, and I panicked and called the police." No one else entered the house, and after the call I stood at the door and waited for the officers. Others knew she was dead and stayed outside. No one wanted to get involved in trouble. The police began gathering more witness statements from neighbors, asking about Tara's relationships and anything unusual in the neighborhood lately. Most people who knew her described her as kind and friendly, with no known disputes. Tara lived alone, but neighbors mentioned that she had an ex-boyfriend who used to visit frequently. Several of the neighbors had seen him before and described him as an unlikable person. He was controlling, jealous, and possessive. Tara was so friendly, and people liked her, but he slapped her just for being too nice. He even gave me a threatening look when I greeted her once. This ex-boyfriend had become Tara's ex about 2 months earlier, but he had harassed her repeatedly after their breakup. However, he hadn't been seen around for over a week. Tara's mother shared that her daughter had told her she had dealt with her ex-boyfriend, seemingly gaining some leverage over him, which made him stay away. Recently, my daughter said she felt like someone was watching her, but this neighborhood is safe, so she told me not to worry. But her feeling was right, and that person took my daughter's life. The police launched an investigation into the ex-boyfriend. His name was Kevin Davis, an employee at a nearby bank. He and Tara had been together for almost a year, during which they fought frequently. He had been jealous and abusive, but they reconciled until 2 months ago when Tara finally broke up with him for good, likely because she had discovered something that gave her the upper hand. This might have been the motive behind the break-in. The police needed to bring him in for questioning. When officers went to the bank to inquire about Kevin, they learned he had taken time off several days earlier and hadn't shown up to work the day before. They tracked down his address through public records, and a team was sent to monitor and apprehend him. Kevin's home was a stark contrast to his polished professional image. The lawn was overgrown with dry leaves, and neighbors said the house had been locked up for days. There was a suspicious foul smell coming from inside. The front door was slightly ajar, raising suspicions, and police stormed in immediately. The sight inside was so horrific that some officers ran out, vomiting. A row of glass jars containing decomposing animal bodies soaked in chemicals lined the room. In the center of the room stood a glass tank with a human skeleton inside. A loud noise came from the bedroom, and officers rushed to find Kevin attempting to escape through the window. Suspect is fleeing through the bedroom window at 3 o'clock. Team 2, take cover outside. Kevin was caught as soon as he hit the ground and was swiftly handcuffed and taken into custody. Back at the station, Kevin appeared nervous and scared during questioning about the skeleton found in his home. Unexpectedly, he asked about Tara. She told the police, "Didn't she, that bitch, Tara? I had to teach her a lesson. She promised not to say anything as long as I stayed away from her." Kevin didn't know that Tara was already dead. After further investigation, the skeleton was identified as belonging to Kevin's late mother. She had died of a heart condition a year earlier, but Kevin, unable to cope with her death, had exhumed her body and kept her remains in his home. Tara had discovered this dark secret during their last argument, which led to their breakup. She used the knowledge of his mother's remains to blackmail Kevin, telling him that if he ever came near her again, she would expose him, and he would lose his mother's body forever. This was enough to make him leave her alone. However, Kevin denied having anything to do with Tara's murder. "I know what I've done makes me look guilty, but I didn't kill anyone," he insisted, providing an alibi for the day Tara was murdered. He claimed he had been meeting with a real estate agent to look for a new home at the time. While the police were confirming Kevin's alibi, forensic investigators found a DNA sample on the glass of water that didn't belong to the victim. It was clear that if Kevin wasn't the killer, then the perpetrator was likely a professional criminal. The DNA was matched to someone in the criminal database, Jason Miller, a convicted felon with a history of violent assaults and public disturbances. Jason had been released from prison the previous November and was now living in the city. 2 months ago, he had moved into the neighborhood as Tara's new neighbor. The police quickly mobilized to arrest Jason. He was known for being volatile and dangerous, so the operation had to be discreet. Plainclothes officers were stationed around his apartment complex, gradually closing in. Detective Lewis knocked on the front door several times, but there was no response. When officers entered the apartment, they found it empty. Jason had fled. His latest location was unknown, and all efforts were now focused on tracking him down. But in the meantime, the city's residents remained on edge. Lewis returned to headquarters with the investigation team and started a meeting. The immediate priority was to locate Jason and capture him before he could disappear completely. They would begin by tracking his car's license plate and phone signal. Traffic authorities across the area were ordered to search for any trace of the suspect. Not long after, his car was found in a suburban area of the city. He had abandoned the car and fled. Later, Lewis came up with an idea. He used a phone to impersonate one of Jason's former criminal associates, luring him into calling back and revealing his location for the police to apprehend him. The plan succeeded. The phone signal showed that Jason was hiding in a makeshift shelter for the poor, far from where he had abandoned the car. He had likely taken a ride to throw off the police. This further solidified their suspicions about him. The arrest in this impoverished and unstable area couldn't be carried out openly, so the police had to devise a stealthy plan. Undercover officers discreetly walked the streets, asking about Jason, offering small rewards. This tactic always worked in that area. Shortly after, one of the investigators pinpointed Jason's exact location. He was asleep in a makeshift tent he had taken from a frail elderly beggar. Jason was still in a drug-induced haze when he was captured. Jason sat in the interrogation room with an indifferent, defiant attitude, seemingly unfazed and full of arrogance. Lewis presented the results of his blood test. First, Jason was being arrested for illegal drug possession and trafficking, as he was found high and carrying a sizable amount of drugs in his small backpack when captured. Jason seemed used to this. With all these charges, how long do you think you'll hold me? I'll be in jail for maybe 2 to 3 years. Ops. It'll be a decent place to rest. It's not just that. What do you say about the murder of Tara, your neighbor? I don't know anything. I didn't kill her. Jason confidently denied having anything to do with the murder, but when confronted with the DNA evidence found in the girl's home, he began to show signs of confusion. Lewis recognized the opportunity and pressed him with a series of probing questions, but Jason was a cunning man. That glass of water, she gave it to me when I helped her fix a plumbing issue that afternoon. You can't use that to frame me. You have no real evidence, no weapon, nothing to prove I killed her. At that moment, the police had retrieved the black box from Jason's car. The footage from inside showed him carrying a backpack and a black bag into the car, which he later discarded on a desolate road near a hillside. The police began a coordinated effort to search the area where the bag had been discarded. One day later, they found what they were looking for, confirming Jason as the murderer. The knife used in the crime, with Jason's fingerprints and the victim's blood, was found along with the clothes he had worn during the murder, hidden in the bag. Kevin's alibi was verified, and he was released. A neighbor who had parked outside on the day of the crime had captured footage of Jason leaving Tara's house after committing the murder. With the evidence laid out before him, Jason had no way to deny it. He became flustered, then panicked, eventually breaking down. How did you find it? I threw it all away. You can't blame me. I tried not to wake her. I just wanted to steal a few things to sell for money. I needed drugs, but then she woke up. I had no choice. I couldn't get caught. I didn't want to go to jail. But she woke up and was about to scream. I couldn't do anything else. In the end, Jason refused to accept responsibility for his actions, blaming others. He lived with a mindset that he was a victim of circumstances, attempting to justify his crimes and numb the guilt. But no matter how hard he tried to defend himself, he would still pay for the atrocities he committed, not just for murder, but for several other offenses as well. Jason's life ended in a tragedy of his own making, with small mistakes gradually leading to larger ones until everything spiraled beyond redemption. Tara had to say goodbye to the world amidst deep sorrow and the loss felt by her loved ones. Once again, it served as a stark reminder of the importance of personal safety and the hidden dangers lurking everywhere in society. It underscored the urgent need for self-defense skills, even in the safest places.